Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode on the Audi TT. Today we're going to start putting the engine back together. So yes, welcome back. Today we're going to start putting the engine back together. However, I have a few parts that I'm going to need to install at the same time. So first of all, we have the elusive head bolts, which have taken over 3 weeks to arrive, but it doesn't matter because I'm so happy they're here. That means I can now fit the head and the head gasket all back into place. But before I do that, what I really want to do is fit the new oil and coolant lines for the turbo. I cannot believe what I witnessed when I stripped this engine down to find that 2 of the pipes have been blanked off. Just why? What were they thinking? Anyway, I now have the new pipes, which means that the turbo will actually work with all this installed. And we also have some new pipes. So this is the PVC breather system. There was a couple that had been blanked off. There was one that was split, and there was one that was coming off of the crankcase, just venting to nothing. So I want to get all these installed back to its factory originality. We also have some new vacuum lines. Now, with these engines, there's a few little valves which the ECU likes to talk to. There's something called an N249 valve, there's an M112 valve, there's a couple of different variants as well between the 225 brake horsepower engine 1.8 turbo and also the 180 brake horsepower 1.8 turbo. However, there is a lot of valves and pipe work and vacuum lines which you can delete and smarten up. So that's what we're going to do with this. However, I'll give you a little bit more information on that when we get to it. But first of all, what I really want to do is get these oil and coolant lines fitted, get the turbo fitted. That way I can then start to concentrate on the time belt kit and the head. So let's get cracking. So the first thing I've just done is I've just taken a pair of needle nose pliers into that downpipe down there to fish out a pair of exhaust impellers that were supposed to be onto the inside of the turbo. If I grab the old turbo, you'll see what I mean. Inside the turbo exhaust side here, there should be some impellers. You should be able to just about see them when you tilt it like this. However, you can clearly see that there's nothing in here. So they have completely smashed to bits and fallen into the downpipe. So I'll remove them. And now everything's nice and clean. That will now allow me to install all the new lines and the new turbo. So what I'm going to do first is install this line here because I have the most access right now. I also have a box of gaskets and mounting gear for the new turbo, which is an absolute must because there's things like copper crush washers that sit between the pipe and the block. So I'm going to get cracking with this pipe now, then I'm going to attach some of the new pipes to the turbo, bolt the turbo to the block, and then we can then do the final install of the other bits to the car. So let's get cracking. Okay, I'm getting pretty sick and tired of whoever had worked on this engine before. I knew there was something fishy when I was unbolting this turbo supply oil line because the bolt is a hex nut, whereas it should be an Allen key type head because it's a Banjo bolt. But this one isn't. It's literally just a bolt. There's no hole in there, which means that there's no oil can get through that bolt, which means that the turbo literally had no oil supply to begin with. So not just the oil return line, but also the actual oil supply line was blanked off. Now, I should have enough bits and pieces here to rectify that, I'm hoping. If not, I'm in a bit of a pickle. So sadly, that missing Banjo bolt has now caused me an absolute headache. I have only got one, which means I can't install both sides of the oil line. But what I've done for now is I've sacrificed the one that was on the oil cooler and I've put it onto the turbo. This has now allowed me to add all coolant and oil lines to the turbo, which means I can fit this in its place. The oil cooler Banjo bolt is actually going to be relatively accessible when the engine's all back together, so at least this way I can get the car 99% back together and just add that Banjo bolt when it arrives. So, as annoying as that is, at least I can carry on and get the engine pretty much complete. Right, so today is a new day. It was getting pretty late in the day when I was fitting the turbo in place. Also, I was getting pretty sick and tired of fighting it every single stage of fitting that turbo back into place. So what I've done today so far is I've jacked up the car, I've put it on axle stands, because what I need to do is add the turbo oil cooler return line to the sump. So I need to get underneath and bolt that to the sump. Also, I'm going to need to remove the driver's side engine mount so that I can lift the engine up and do the timing belt whilst I'm here. Once I've then replaced the tensioners for the timing belt, I can then start to think about putting the cylinder head back in place. So first of all, what I'm going to do is get underneath, connect that oil return line, and then we can concentrate on the timing belt. So let's get cracking. So eventually, 2 hours later, and the oil return line is now on. Unfortunately, I bought the wrong version. It was the one that come off of a non-Quattro TT, and obviously on the Quattro you have another piece of the gearbox called a transfer box, which splits the front wheel drive and rear wheel drive. That box was in the way of me routing the oil return line to the sump, so I've had to do a little bit of rerouting, but we've eventually got there, like I said, 2 hours later, which now means I can start to tackle the timing belt and getting the engine mount off, so then I can start putting the head all back together. So that's what I'm going to do now. Let's get cracking. So now with the engine mount removed, I now have lots of room to access the water pump and the timing belt tensioner. So what I'm going to do is remove this cover. That will unveil the water pump and the tensioner. I can get them replaced, put the timing belt on kind of in much the same way that I've done here, and then I can pop the head on, time it all up properly, and then we'll go from there. But first of all, let's get this cover off. Right, so with that cover removed, we can now see the water pump and we can see the tensioner. Now, here is the new tensioner. There is a bracket on the tensioner here at the top where you're supposed to be able to squeeze the tensioner down using a screw in this hole with the tensioner that is on the head. However, on the engine, this has been snapped. So this is a definite must. The water pump actually looks relatively new, however, obviously as part of this Gates kit, I've got a nice shiny new one here, so I'm just going to replace it anyway. So let's go. So now we've got the new water pump and the new tensioner all in place. What I really want to do now is pop the head gasket on and the head on loosely. Just put the bolts in, not going to do any final torque settings or anything just yet. I just want it on there so I can then time the belt up, and then I can put everything all together this side. Then I can concentrate on doing all the torque settings and then building everything else up around it. Right, so with the head now in place loosely, and I really do mean loosely because I've only done the head bolts up finger tight right now, I've also placed the valve cover back on. Again, I'm not going to be doing this up because I've got all new gaskets for the valve cover, but what I wanted to make sure was that the timing belt marks line up, which they do. So I can now replace this tensioner, and then I can place the timing belt and kit, then I can put the engine mount all back together, lower the engine back into its original position, then I can concentrate on doing up all the head bolts in the correct order and the correct torque. So first of all, let's get this done, and then we can fit the timing belt. Right, so with the new tensioner now in place, I can now try and fit the timing belt. I hate doing this stage, so let's hope that it goes smoothly. Right, so the timing belt is now on. It wasn't actually much of a fight as I was fearing, so I'm really pleased. I've also removed the pin out of the adjuster here, which adjusts how tight the tensioner goes, so the belt is now nice and tight. So what I can do now is put all the covers back on, put the engine mount back on, lower the engine back into its original place, then I can concentrate on torquing the head up in the correct order with the correct torque settings. So first of all, let's get these covers on.
You're fine, but now you're out of time. Out of time. You're out of time. You're out of time. And now you're out.
Right, so the covers are now on, the bottom pulley is now on, so it is now time to fit the engine mount.
Now you're out of
for the all-important head torque. In the head kit, I have got a list of instructions, gives me the correct torque settings, and it also gives me the correct sequence. So this is where I have to torque the bolts down in this particular order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I've got to do that first at 40 newton meters, then do it all again at 60 newton meters, and then do a 90 degree, and then followed by another 90 degree, all in that correct order. So let's get to it. Right, so I've now done the first and second round. So I've done first at 40, then I've done the second one at 60. Now it is time to try and do 2 lots of 90.
Now you're out of time.
With the gaskets now in place, I need to pop the valve covers on, intake valves. Like so. Now pop the valve cover back on. Now I need to bolt it all up. Right, so with the head now back onto the car, I'd like to try and bolt the turbo back to the exhaust manifold gasket. So I've obviously got my new gasket here. I've got my 3 new bolts. Now I'm going to try and wiggle the turbo back up to the exhaust manifold and bolt it together. Wish me luck. So there we go, a load of progress has been made again. We now have the timing belt installed with the new tensioners and water pump. The new head gasket is now in place and the head bolted back together, as well as the new turbo and all its new lines. So all I'm missing now for the turbo is that 1 oil Banjo bolt. So hopefully that'll arrive next week and we can put everything back together and even give it its first start. So until then, join me next time.